Let's pretend it's the end of this whole ugly story. We vanquished the foe and we triumphed in glory. There's nothing but rainbows and blue skies ahead. Hallelujah, amen, it's the
Welcome
end.
to Before the Future Came, temporarily not a Star Trek podcast. We're looking at the ideals of utopian science fiction as we voyage from one work to the next, following a breadcrumb trail of motifs. This month we're talking about The Wild Robot by Peter Brown. It's a #1 New York Times best-selling chapter book for readers ages 8 to 11. I'm Gregory, and I did not know the animal language until now.
I'm Lucy, and death scenes are my specialty, but I have a wide dramatic range.
I'm Melissa, and I thought I'd come down and introduce myself, but now I'm nervous that I'm talking too much, and my name is Melissa. I think I said that already.
So, last episode we discussed the novella Binti, which explored how people have to change to survive and the relationship between language and thought. Today we're talking about The Wild Robot, which definitely grapples with some of those same concepts. Lucy picked it, so if you could, please give us a summary of The Wild Robot in your own words.
Summary from Robot Memory Logs. I don't have a date for it. And I'm not going to do the whole thing in the robot voice. Although I do enjoy robot voice. Alright, here's the summary. Roz and 4 other robots in packing crates wash up on the shore of an island after a hurricane. Some otters, playing with Roz's inanimate body, accidentally turn her on, not like that, and her survival programming sets in. She is plagued by slippery mountains, chased by bears, and scorned by the other animals who think she is a monster. After noticing how an insect camouflages itself, Roz begins hiding and observing the animals on the island, and soon she learns to speak animal languages, although this does not really help her make friends with any animals. But one day, after falling through the branches of a tree and accidentally crushing some geese and eggs, she adopts the one remaining goose egg, whose occupant believes she is his mother. She, after consulting with some other animals, also comes to believe that she is his mother. Once she is caring for her adopted goose son, the other animals on the island begin to befriend Roz, and soon she has a house, a garden, and loads of friends. She even manages to befriend the fearsome bears, though she loses a foot in the process. The animals make her a wooden foot to replace it. She raises her son Brightbill until he learns to swim, then fly, then migrate south for the winter with the other geese. Over the winter, Roz saves as many animals as she can from the brutal cold by building lodges with fire pits. Once the winter is over, Brightbill and his flock return with information about the outside world, where they encountered other robots and guns. Roz and the animals celebrate spring with a wild rumpus, which is observed by a passing ship. Soon, a plane carrying 3 robots show up to collect Roz and the remains of the other destroyed robots on the island. Roz does not want to go with them, but they chase her and destroy her body, though the 3 pursuing robots are ultimately destroyed by the animals on the island. Do not speak to me and my son ever again, though not before Roz is warned that her makers will continue pursuing her. Roz, her body completely destroyed, is loaded onto the plane along with all of the other robot parts to return to her makers because she wants them to leave the island alone and she hopes to have her body repaired.
Excellent summary.
Yes, thank you.
This is an adorable book.
It is, both physically and the story.
Yeah, something that doesn't necessarily come across in that summary is that there are like a whole bunch of illustrations. These gorgeous, I think they're digital, but they kind of look like paper cutouts. And like there's at least one 2-page full spread that's a gorgeous when there's an incident where they experiment with turning Roz off and back on again, and the shot of Roz in deactivated with Brightbill looking at her is just heartbreaking.
So good. Peter Brown actually his books are mostly children's books, and younger children's books, picture books, and he's an illustrator. So that's sort of his bread and butter.
Yeah, absolutely amazing art. I'm sure it will come up to varying degrees throughout all of our discussions. But we have each brought a topic for discussion. And mine is the relationship in this book between community and ownership, particularly in sort of the broader context of it as a utopian work. Often in utopian, when we look at utopian works and we talk about possession or ownership of land or items, it's often talked about in contrast with whatever the writer's, the author's society is, right? Mm-hmm. So now we're doing a communism or a socialism, or now we're doing a very problematic reference to indigenous people or something like this, right? And this book, I think, is particularly notable in that it doesn't have to make that contrast, and it doesn't. Like, it just doesn't. There's no, like, unlike humans, like, because humans are largely removed from the narrative, mm-hmm. it is us that bring the comparison as we read it of, these things are or are not owned, etc. Here's a model that applies. Oh, this is how animals do or not. So I thought that was particularly interesting, is that the author manages to completely kind of sidestep the question of, here's an attribute about this community. It is distinct from humanity.
Yeah, I found myself thinking about that when she's getting her house and getting her garden made, there's a lot of exchanges that are set up where it's like, hey, if you build me a house, I will bring, talking to a beaver, she offers to bring a beaver trees so that they don't have to spend time cutting down trees in exchange for building a house. And, like, it's not capitalist, but it is just, like, trade. It's just straight up exchange of goods and services.
I would say it's really similar to the Bourdieuian concept of social capital. Because, it's originally, it's that goose, I can't remember, loudmouth or something, who owes the beaver, or the beaver owes the goose a favor. So the goose is like, you remind that beaver that, I'm owed a favor. Mm-hmm. And then Roz is able to help the beavers, and then, she slowly accrues that social capital. And I mean, other people maybe would just call it, I don't know, trust building. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that there are very few things that are owned in this, even though you would kind of think that, like, there would be hoarding of resources or hoarding of something. But even when these favors are exchanged and the social capital is built, it feels surprisingly lacking in transactionality, right? You if there were, I don't know, two humans in our society, be like, well, I gave you a favor of this size, now you owe me a favor of equivalent size, and they even kind of joke a little bit.
They're transactions, but they're, like, mutual. It's like the ideal concept that people talk about, of, like, people who are pro-capitalist talk about, with, like, oh, well, exchange benefits everyone. And it's like, yeah, it does. And that's not a property of our current monetary system. That's just, like, how people interact with each other.
Exactly. And I think one of the interesting kind of barriers to this that gets navigated is the idea of safety, right? Like, while Roz is a monster, quote unquote, or a threat or whatever, she does not have that social capital to be able to make those, to live in this space and share those resources, basically. But as she kind of fills in this space and adopts a son, right, who is also not a possession. The son is freely shared with his own species and the community at large. There's not this sort of, oh, I have something, let me keep it. As the barrier of safety begins to break down, so Roz becomes safe and the environment becomes safe or unsafe, depending on the season. As winter comes, we have animals starving, we have the flock of geese are gone. Roz is able to not only open up her own home, but is able to build additional homes and make space and teach animals fire, and which is wild. And none of that is hoarded, right? There are no strings attached to that knowledge or those gifts. And so I love it. Like, as much as I like the property that this show will eventually be about and that we are not discussing, it is very much caught up in contrasting itself with modern human society. And so I thought this book was so sweet. Like, it didn't have to, when there was conflict, it was not centered on, I have something and I won't share it. Which is refreshing.
And it's not like totally, it's not, a lot of talking animal stories make their talking animals basically just people, but like, this is absolutely a story that's like, yeah, they have this convention where like there's an hour a day where they don't fight or eat each other, but like, they still do eat each other the rest of the time. Like, there's a line during the winter where like they spend nights in the lodge, and there's an agreement that they won't fight or eat each other in the lodge. But like, there's a line that's like, where I hope I noted it down.
Oh, let me see if I can find it.
I did not, but it's a line that's like, sometimes one lodger would return inside the stomach of another, and that made for some awkward conversation.
Yes.
It comes up in their very first dawn meeting when Fink is like, yeah, it's almost breakfast time. That understanding that they're about to return to predator and prey behaviors any minute. What Lissa's talking about reminds me a lot of a novel called Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. I'm certain I've talked about it to you two before, but it's like, he has this concept of leavers and takers. I will say the overarching story of Ishmael is that Ishmael is a gorilla who is like teaching his student. So it is also very concerned with animals and humans as animals, and makes this sort of argument that when humans became agricultural, they became takers, right? That they would want to hoard and keep more things than they needed, instead of being leavers who only took what was necessary, instead of feeling like, you always had to plan and save, which is different than animal behavior. He argues a distinction between human and animal behavior. Which I'm not endorsing the ideas of this book, because I haven't looked up Daniel Quinn in a long time. I don't know. Maybe he's a huge problem. I did find the book really interesting when I originally read it. I could see how some of the ideas in it could be used for bad trains of thought.
Yeah. Something I was left wondering is that, this ostensibly, Roz does not have emotions. Roz is acting, right? When there are scenes where Bright Bill is leaving or getting into trouble, or where there are sort of more emotive reactions, is Roz's lack of possessiveness a factor due to her lack of emotion?
I mean, so first, Roz is emotionless. Like, Roz completely feels all of these things.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I think it's her innocence, for lack of a better term. Like, Roz is a tabula rasa. She's a blank slate, right? So she doesn't remember. She wasn't alive before she woke up on the beach with those otters, and so she like doesn't know about human society, and so she's sort of playing with some of the, like, it's not noble savage stuff, it's more like angel descending from the heavens and living among us stuff. But she, like, doesn't know to be selfish, is some of the implication.
I mean, I think she's literally not a tabula rasa, though, right? Because she's programmed, right? She has a programming, like, a way that she knows how to behave because of her programming, which I think would not be. And just to come back to earlier, when we're told she has no emotion, what it says is, as we all know,
yes,
robots do not have emotions.
Right.
So I think that is very careful phrasing on the part of the author. Like, that's understood,
yes.
But I think he is going to have us explore whether that is true. What are emotions?
Right. And of course, I agree. She absolutely does have emotions.
And yeah, she's this weird circumstance of having knowledge but no personal memories, right? So she can look up what fire is or what different animals are or how the solar system works, but and theoretically she knows that humans exist, but she doesn't seem to know that humans made her, and doesn't seem to know that, like, she has no memories of anything but the island. And so, like, she has knowledge without the identity tied to that knowledge. Yeah,
it's a weirdly light amount of programming and compared to the way we normally think of robots coming off of the assembly line, knowing what their job is, knowing that they are going to go be house servants or whatever. And they didn't even give Roz that. So yes, community ownership. I think this book does a very good job of just letting it sit and have you go, well, wait, shouldn't there be hoarding? And even when winter is coming, there is a collection of resources that happens by some of the animals, but it is in passing sort of, I don't know, I'll talk a little bit later about, what's natural or not, but
I'm sure we'll be talking about that a lot.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, actually, a lot of what Melissa had to say, I think, is going to tie in with what I'm interested in talking about in this novel, which I also found to be a real treat to read, and I look forward to reading the next two. So I'm going to start just because I'm a literature professor, and I'm actually teaching children's lit this semester, and a lot of people may not be aware that children's literature is a fairly new field. Like, it wasn't considered to be a subject worth studying for quite a long time. So, it's only a pretty recent phenomenon that you could take a class at college on children's literature. Used to be you could only take classes on Shakespeare and, I don't know, world literature, like whoever came up with all the things that we're allowed to study. And now we study children's literature. And a quote I've come across in teaching my own class is C.S. Lewis, who famously noted that if only children enjoy a piece of children's literature, then the writer hasn't done a very good job. And I think this book is a good book for kids. Like, I think kids will probably enjoy this book, but I do think it has a lot of really complex things that it's toying with. And I'm particularly interested in the idea of wildness, which I know why you two, we've been talking about wildness, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but I want to start with a literature perspective. In literature, we often talk about a dichotomy between wildness and the pastoral. So, for example, a pastoral setting would be like a lot of romantic poetry. My favorite poem is called The Daffodils by William Wordsworth, and it's a pastoral version of nature. I wandered lonely as a cloud, which floats on higher vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd. A host of golden daffodils. Beside the lake, beneath the trees, tumbling and dancing in the breeze, 1,000,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. That's a very romantic version of nature. The flowers are beautiful, but you're not sneezing, right? You're not inundated by, like, being in nature, which is very uncomfortable. And if you can contrast that with wildness, and the book I always think of is that I was actually think, I don't know if it counts as a memoir. It's called Into the Wild. It's about that guy who is in Alaska and he ends up dying. He's stranded in his car.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure it can be called a memoir because he's dead. He couldn't have written it, but it was based on his real life. And it presents a version of the outdoors where nature is a problem to be solved by a person, or you're defeated by it. And so in literary studies, this is sometimes a thing that we think about. And I thought it was interesting in the note at the end of the book, Peter Brown writes about robots and animals and how he imagines that their programming and instincts aren't actually very different, which is how he came to the idea of the wild robot. He was interested in that idea of instinct. And so I'm interested in how his version of literary wildness might relate to philosophical concepts of wildness, and to think about what he might be offering us in this narrative to help us kind of think more about a philosophical version of wildness, which I will now reference Jack Halberstam's Wild Things, The Disorder of Desire.
Lucy.
Because I'm so sorry, but I have to.
You have to.
I mean, I think Halberstam is trying to present a philosophy of wildness.
Before we get into Halberstam, why are we all groaning at Halberstam?
We stopped reading the book.
Yeah, so we
didn't like it.
We have a book club that we do where we read books and talk about them amongst the three of us. And I like some of Halberstam's stuff. This one we found ourselves dreading reading. Yeah,
I mean, they are trying to present an idea about wildness, sort of situated within queer theory, and maybe sort of deconstruction. Deconstruction by way of Derrida. But I think one of the things we found extremely frustrating about it was their unwillingness to pin down a definition of wildness that might be useful. Mm-hmm. And I think we do all understand that is the nature of queer theory and deconstruction, is that definitions are difficult to pin down. But it's also really challenging when, we want to think as philosophers and as queer people who exist in the world. What do you do with this, right? So I don't think Halberstam is actually super useful to thinking through this book, except for maybe they're both interested in Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, because I definitely see, I think both of them are paying homage to that children's lit classic. I know in my summary I mentioned the wild rumpus. That actually isn't called a wild rumpus in the book, but it was what I immediately thought of when they're having this wild celebration of spring. The wild rumpus from Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are came to my mind. So another philosopher who I'm almost loath to bring up is Friedrich Nietzsche. But I do think so. Brown's text does grapple a bit more literally with Nietzsche's. I can't say Nietzsche, by the way. I want to say Nietzsche is big Y. That's how I grew up. I'm from South Carolina, and it's just what we say there. But I know it's not right, so I'm going to try and say Nietzsche. Anyway, Nietzsche also doesn't differentiate between organic and inorganic life in the ways that Brown does too. I think that's something that you see in Nietzsche. I don't think Brown is endorsing that concept of will to power, which is really important in that philosopher's thinking. But it is clear that Roz and the animals do struggle for existence, and their need to survive is crucial. Here's one quote, for example. There comes for every man an hour in which he asks himself in wonderment, how is one able to live, and yet one does live? An hour in which he begins to understand that he possesses an inventiveness of the same kind as he admires in plants, which climb and wind and finally gain some light and a patch of soil and thus create for themselves their share of joy on inhospitable ground. And another, he writes, You aspire to free heights, your soul thirsts for the stars, but your wicked instincts too thirst for freedom. Your wild dogs want freedom. They bark with joy in their cellar when your spirit plans to open all prisons. So I think there is a part of this writing that is about how humans' instincts, right, like veer toward freedom, veer toward self-actualization in a way that I see maybe Brown hinting toward. And I would argue this only a somewhat Nietzschean route that Brown takes to what Lissa was really talking about. This community that is essentially anti-capitalist, right? And I think is why this is, for me, sort of a utopian novel. I won't say sort of. I think this is a utopian novel. And that's 4 big things. One, you see that survival and joy in the community's survival, right? There's a sort of joy that comes from that survival as a community. 2, you see restorative justice. Roz cares for the gosling who she accidentally destroys, Bright Bill's parents and the other eggs. And instead of being punished for that, she doesn't take on punishment. Nobody punishes her. There's no prison for robots who smash eggs. But instead, she cares for the egg and she raises the goose. That's restorative justice. I will talk about this for the rest of my life as an example of it.
And there's another example of, I think that this didn't end up in the summer because it doesn't actually end up being that important, but there's a family of bears that initially the bears chase Roz, and then Roz befriends the whole community, and then the bears are kind of the last to befriend Roz, and they attack her. The 2 child bears attack Roz. The mother stops them, and like immediately one of the kids ends up falling over a cliff and dangling from a branch, cartoon style, and Roz immediately saves the kid, and the bears kind of immediately trust her to save the kid, and like there's actually not a step of restorative justice there because the bears are the ones who harmed Roz, but there's that feeling of like forgiveness, of like,
yeah,
no harm, no foul sort of feeling.
Yeah, I mean, people are not hanging on to sort of, like, I think there's ways in which when we think about justice in our current world, we think about it in ways that are unhelpful because we think, oh, an eye for an eye, right? And that's actually not super helpful.
What is the appropriate punishment for this transgression?
Yeah.
What is the cost?
Right. How to make it right. Right. And this is a world where I'll say people. Yeah. People make things right. I also noticed in this book the impact on human society on global warming and general survival. Remember the turtle, Craig, talks about how the winters have gotten colder and the summers hotter. So there's an understanding about the ways in which industrialization and capitalism have impacted even the planet and global warming. 4, and this really loops back to what Lissa had to say, violence and death happen, and it's a cycle, right? People get eaten, people die in the winter, those things happen, but the big difference is it is only the violence of ownership that is worth being struggled against, right? Yeah. When the robots come to retrieve Roz at the end, that is worth struggling against. That is worth them engaging in struggle. It's not, these other kinds of things that happen, those are different. The robots want to force Roz to come with them because they believe that she is owned, and she is not. She's not just a wild robot, but a free robot. And I think that's where Brown's definitions kind of relate to Nietzsche in a way, although better than Nietzsche, because, Nietzsche was used very prominently by Nazis and fascists. So, be careful with your philosophy studies. They can go bad. And I think Brown gives us something better than Nietzsche, better than Halberstam, because I think he gives us actionable examples of joy in wildness, restorative justice, and even how to choose when to engage in that sort of generative struggle. So it's children's lit, but it reminds me so much of Mariam Kaba, famed prison abolitionist. Her short story, Justice, which is about a 16-year-old dead person who observes what happens to her community in the wake of her murder. And anyway, that was a long path to why I thought this novel brings up anti-capitalist premises in really powerful, actionable ways.
Yeah. It's super cool.
I might have to write an article about it. I might have to send it into like Voices in the Middle or something.
Radical Teacher.
Now I'm thinking I might send it into like a NCTE publication, because I think I'd write something appropriate for teachers.
NCTE?
National Council of Teachers of English.
So you talked about that tension between pastoralism and wild stories, and like those two modes of seeing nature in stories. And I think that there's a subgenre where those two things touch, where this book at least starts. The first 50 pages or so of this book are a survival story. It's a subgenre that's adjacent to like castaway stories, like Robinson Crusoe, Swiss Family Robinson, that sort of thing, or The Martian, are stories where person comes to wild place, lands, has to survive and escape. One of the things about those is they usually have they're usually interfacing with indigeneity. Like there's almost always a point in one of those stories where you meet a Native American or a rival political group, or find out that there are pirates on the island, that sort of thing. But survival stories, especially in children's literature, are kind of a distinct side offshoot of that. So I'm thinking of Hatchet was the book that was real big when I was a kid. Island of the Blue Dolphins is a classic. There are a whole lot of these which
I love the Island of the Blue Dolphins.
But like these are stories where a kid usually finds themselves alone and like in nature and like having to figure out how to fend for themselves until they can somehow rejoin society or be rescued or something like that. And those books often have the thing you see here, where it's a mixture of admiring the beauty of nature in the pastoral way, but then also like encountering, a bear that's trying to eat you, or starvation, or eating the wrong berry and having to throw up. But those stories almost always have this sort of like settler fantasy of like, well, first I'm going to figure out how to make fire, and then I'm going to figure out how to get shelter, and then I'm going to figure out how to hunt, and by the end I've got this whole complex of like, here's where I do my pottery, and here I've now conquered nature and sort of reproduced this technological system in a place of nature. And this book just doesn't do that. Right? This book does the initial survival part of, oh no, I'm muddy, oh no, I'm dented, I don't want to get struck by lightning, these animals are attacking me or running away from me, what do I do? But then instead of Roz going, well, I understand fire, so I need to make a fire to keep the animals away. And then I understand, how to make things, so I'm going to make weapons, and I'm going to make a shelter. Like, she uses her technological knowledge, but when she makes fire, it's to warm her son. When she makes a shelter, it's to keep herself and her son safe. And it's not a step in a progress towards like self-sufficiency. She's solar powered. She is already self-sufficient, and she could and does. The way she learns animal language is just by like standing still and being completely camouflaged. And like she learns how to camouflage as a skill, and then she just like tries camouflaging as different things. Like when she camouflages, she's like, now she's a tree, now she's a rock, now she's a something.
It's pretty amazing. It's incredibly charming.
I loved it.
And
the pictures, speaking of that, of those camouflage parts are amazing.
It's just basically like clear robot shape with stuff on it.
Yes.
Yeah, that one on page 43, I just want it on my wall. I think it's gorgeous.
Real good.
It's Roz with flowers and like plants just covering her. It's gorgeous.
But that sort of that attitude of like meeting nature where it is makes me think of some philosophy that I've been reading on for the book that I'm writing. That's this generally falls under the posthumanism umbrella, but I'm specifically thinking of object-oriented ontology and alien phenomenology. So if you're a programmer, object-oriented ontology is basically just named as a joke on programmers. It doesn't have anything to do with object-oriented programming. It's the idea of like, so ontology is the theory of what things exist and what sorts of things exist and what things are real. And object-oriented ontology basically says humans are not a prime subject that gets to decide everything about the world. Object-oriented ontology, very, very high level, is saying everything, and a thing might be a glass or a person or an animal or the concept of love or a planet. All of these are in a flat ontology where these are all things that exist and they all are different from each other, and there's always some aspect of them that's inaccessible to other objects, and their existence is defined in part by their relation to other things. So like a glass to a human is a thing that can be used to store water. A human to an animal is maybe food, or can maybe be something that kills it, or all these things. And like, things are not defined by their relationship to humans, and things don't really fit into easy categorizable taxonomies. So that's object-oriented ontology. Graham Harman and Levi Bryant sort of did that, came up with those concepts, and then Ian Bogost builds on that in his book Alien Phenomenology, or What It's Like to Be a Thing, which is, phenomenology is distinct from ontology. Phenomenology is like, what are experiences? Like, what is it like to experience things, and like what things exist as experiences as opposed to as objects. And Bogost basically is like, this whole flat ontology thing is cool, but it still kind of has the problem of like, well, what do we do with that then? And Bogost is like, well, you can, because things are defined by their relationships, you can think about the experience of a thing that may or may not have experiences, right? You can think about what it's like to be a rock. You can think about what it's like to be a squirrel. And these are, like, you could not only think about them, but it is in some way true that these things have experiences and opinions and relationships to each other. And this book, like, is definitely taking, like, the Wild Robot is saying, the Wild Robot is doing talking animal stories, right? It's doing fable stuff, but also it's presenting animals as creatures with interiority that is not human interiority. And it's kind of saying the robot is just another thing in this forest. It's not like the king of the forest, or the queen of the forest in this case. She's not someone who gets to decide how things relate to each other. She's trying to figure out her place in this island of bears and trees and rocks and ponds and beavers and storms, and like, all of these things are just interacting with each other on even footing.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's different from how survival books normally get into that.
Yeah, there's even a part in which I think the narrator says that Roz is another kind of life, artificial life.
Yeah, real early. Like, it's normally that sort of thing would be like the conclusion of like, she finally realizes that she's alive. It's like how she introduces herself. She's like, I'm alive, but not like you.
Well, I guess I wanted to understand the object-oriented ontology and alien phenomenology concept. Is it sort of decentering humans is sort of the point of knowledge construction? Is that
and that's kind of the
part of the idea of it?
That's kind of the general posthumanism thing, and the way that it does this, the way that that these philosophies remove human primacy, remove the role of human as eternal subject that gets to decide what's what, is by sort of figuring out, like, it's kind of saying, try and think of objects, humans as an object, and all other objects as the same sort of object as humans are. Like, you can say that water wants to run downhill, and like that doesn't need to be anthropomorphization, right? We talk about anthropomorphizing things as this bad thing of like, think of this as a person, and it's like, you shouldn't think of water as human, but you can think of it as wanting things. And sort of alien phenomenology is sort of saying, I may be grossly misrepresenting Bogost here, but the way I understand it is that it's saying things can desire stuff, and that doesn't make them human, and it doesn't necessarily make them people, although the animals in this book absolutely are people. But there are things, it's about like detaching certain experiences and relationships from the concept of humanity, and saying like, we can talk about motivations and agency of things that otherwise that like the standard way of thinking is that like, these things don't want things, these things don't do things, they're only acted upon. And both object-oriented ontology and alien phenomenology say, no, they absolutely do things to each other. Like, the door keeps you out of a house. The door, right? Like you are acted upon by things, and it's not, the fact that you're human doesn't mean that you can somehow define the universe.
So I have a really important question now. Do you feel like you could help me write about that with an audience of third grade teachers to like be able to talk about sort of post-human pedagogy?
I don't know much about pedagogy, but sure.
I think I have a new project for the project list.
Is this before or after the article that was discussed about?
I think it's that article.
Oh, okay.
Excellent.
Okay.
I just thought, this would be really actually better than the direction I was already thinking. Okay, let's go on the survival tangent.
So as I was reading this book, and I was thinking about the structures of survival books and how they tend to go, the first thing that came to mind was the video game series Shelter, in which you are playing a lynx, I think, a wild cat. Yeah, and at least the one that I played, you are starting off having a litter of kittens. And
I think you played the second one on stream. That's like, the first one's about a badger family, I think, and maybe the second one's about a lynx family. Yes,
so that's the one I played, and it starts sad, and gets sadder. Gets more hopeful, actually.
Yeah, you can like get your cubs eaten by a hawk and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, you lose you lose a kitten like immediately. It was so sad, but
I was about to want to play it, but now I do not.
I do recommend it. I don't necessarily recommend it, easily. But for one, the art style of that game is not unlike the way the art works in this book, and Peter Brown's art style of this sort of particularly kind of flat style, like some of the coloring choices, some of the shading choices line up. But that is a survival game about keeping your children safe, keeping yourself safe, helping everyone grow up, that also isn't interested in building technology or being some sort of human cat. You're a cat that pounces and attacks and so on. So anyway, that was a passing thought as I was reading this.
Yeah, you can kind of contrast that with a game like, Minecraft or any of the survival games. The Woods, I think, is a good example. Don't Starve, where it's like, those are games about finding resources that you can use to separate yourself from nature and free yourself from the connections of the natural world. And just Shelter isn't like that.
Right.
Neither is The Wild Robot.
Regrettably, the second thing I thought of was the Clan of the Cave Bear series.
Oh, yes.
Which I have read the... Lucy's face on camera. I'm sorry.
Lucy's just shaking their head.
I'll never...
You always regret introducing Lissa, to that series?
This is my cross to bear.
It is a gift that keeps giving. So I've only read the first 2 books in the series, and what's one of the things that's notable...
Just to be clear, that is like 700 pages at least.
It's so much.
They're huge books. In which relatively little happens.
Oh, that's not true.
Well, people's memory of what happens in those books, it turns out, is different than what actually does. Mm-hmm. But one thing that's particularly notable about the series is that the main character, who is a child who loses her parents in a snowstorm or some other sort of storm, and she ends up getting picked up by other type of human that's not like her.
These are like...
And these are
Cro-Magnon, caveman type people.
Exactly. And as this is proceeding, and especially as you move into the second book where she's by herself, this girl is reinventing, she's bootstrapping the entire technological chain of humanity. Like, and part of it is like, oh, you know, this is why this branch of humanity survived, but the ways in which she builds shelter, the ways in which she perceives objects, the ways in which she's able to tame horses and befriend wild lions, like...
And use urine to make shampoo.
It's such a technological fantasy that it's just a huge contrast with this book, and both characters start innocent. Both of them have some knowledge about...
This is Roz from Wild Robot, and what's the Clan of the Cave Bear?
Ayla, yes.
Maybe Ayla is right. You shouldn't listen to me.
I think the audiobook, which I do not recommend, is the way to read those books.
Just because they're long?
Because they're long, and because the narrator's voice is very...
I couldn't.
It's very sweet.
I just couldn't.
It's very sweet for what happens in the book. But let's see, where's I going with that? Oh, both of them have some base knowledge as they're coming into the world and as they're learning how things work, but they go in such different directions. Clan of the Cave Bear is very interested in being genius, and being the smartest, and being the most clever, and, you know, devising these solutions, which is much more traditional sort of survival story in one way or another, even though it has a certain pretense of living in harmony with nature, right? It's she hasn't tamed the horse. The horse is her friend. Nonetheless, I think it contrasts very starkly with Wild Robot in the sense of, like, you don't have to be the cleverest. This wasn't a book about someone solving the Rubik's Cube of how to survive.
Yeah,
it was a step by step.
She learns camouflage from a stick insect. She learns how to build houses from a beaver. She has prosthetics made by various critters. She learns gardening from a deer. Like,
she learns social manners from someone.
Yeah.
Was it the possum?
That was the possum.
Yeah. So anyway, I now live a life where there's a solid 15 to 25% of books I read now that unfortunately remind me in some fashion of Clan of the Cave Bear, and I'm happy to share it with you.
Anyway, so we've got the big topics discussed. Does anyone have lightning round topics of other interesting things you spotted in the book?
Yes, so one quick topic I wanted to bring up is, it ties into everything we've talked about, of course, but the idea of what comes naturally to people in this world and what requires practice. And I'm thinking particularly of Roz's son, who, when the flying lessons start...
Who is a goose, remember, everyone. The robot son is a goose.
Yes, the robot son is a goose. A very adorable sounding goose.
A good goose.
And very precocious.
Good goose. I just love that robot's son.
He's so great. And when he's trying to fly, there's a point at which he shouts, like, "Look, Mom, I'm a natural. I'm a natural." And then as he's learning these tricks, even in like the same page, as he's learning different techniques, it's like, you got to keep practicing. Let's keep practicing. And this sort of, it's not even in tension. There's not even a conflict in the story between this idea that I'm a natural at something and I must practice something, which is not how our society currently works.
Yeah.
We have this idea that if you're naturally gifted or naturally, a great musician naturally, then you require far less practice or don't need to practice or you shouldn't need to practice or whatever. And this book puts all this aside. This says, like, we have things that are sort of fundamental drives, whether that is to survive and not get too wet or get hit by electricity, or to fly or migrate or, to build in certain ways, and you still hone those things. Those things still change and evolve as you learn, to whatever degree of focus. So I love it.
I would just add something to the triangle, or make it a triangle maybe, because, there's practice and then there's this sort of natural or innate ability. But I think this book argues there's a third angle on the triangle, and that's like study or observation. Like,
yes,
because,
yes.
That's how Roz operates, right? Like, she camouflages or listens and, learns language. And then she has her and her goose son watch the birds. They watch how the geese fly, right, for a long time. And it certainly isn't explicit in the book, but I think there's a real implication that it's his study that makes him so good at it, because by the end he's the leader of the geese, right? Even though he doesn't even have a familial unit among the geese.
That's leader in the sense of leading a flying V. I don't know that he has, like, political power. Just for those who haven't read the book.
Yeah. I think I had lumped that in with practice, in the sense of practice not just being the repetitiveness, but also the trying stuff out and seeing what's there. But I think you're right. It's also useful to separate that out in terms of how do you know what to practice? You see that through observation, and you don't just naturally know what to try. You have to think about it and observe it. So, yeah. So there's why. I just thought it was delightfully nuanced and not binary.
Yeah, I love it that you brought it up too. I mean, it actually, I'm really interested in the question of design, because it comes up multiple times in the novel. It'll say, I think the goose son, Brightbill, is designed for swimming, right? And designed for flying, and this creature is designed for this. And then when Roz plants her garden, she was designed to work with plants. And there was another part, she was not designed to do this. And that's an interesting word choice. It's certainly connotatively rich to constantly say that creatures or people are designed for something or not designed for it.
I almost used the quote as my intro, but the perhaps I'm simply made to help people out or something like that. That's sort of, I like that.
I think it is able to, it's very clear that it's not saying something about intelligent design or God, because Roz's makers are literally like, they're people, right?
Yeah, Roz literally was designed.
Right.
Or Roz's body and brain were?
Certainly it talks about how animals are designed for this or that as well, which is interesting. This is just a little, like, a sub-note about that. I really thought a long time about how point of view works in this book. Because it's not just following Roz, right? Like, because you get the perspective of the other robots when they come and other animals on the island. I think it's really centered on the island. Your point of view cannot leave the island in this book.
Yeah.
Because you don't, like, we can't go with Brightbill. We can only hear the story that Brightbill tells when he returns. We don't ever see the factories. We don't ever see where the robots are from. We can only hear what happens on the island. So I think that's the sort of point of view restriction of the novel.
When the ship spots the bonfire, I thought that we got an image of the ship.
Because the ship is passing the island at that point. So that's in the realm of our perspective.
Yeah, there are two ships we see. Because we see the first, or I think we see it and Brightbill doesn't notice it, maybe. And then we see the one at the bonfire as it's passing by and it keeps going.
Yeah, but we don't get a picture of it. We get a picture of some of the things that Brightbill sees off of the island as he's telling the story. But we don't get to see we see the initial container ship, I think, that Roz comes from. But we don't get to see the one that spots the bonfire and ultimately gets the repo robots there.
It's on.
We do see a second ship.
Oh,
it's on page 219. They were so busy singing and laughing and dancing that they didn't see the cargo ship as it sliced past the island. But the ship saw them. It saw the towering bonfire. It saw the robot. And then it quietly continued through the darkness.
Yeah, so we get it in text, but not in drawing.
Page 117 is the beginning of chapter 40. It's called The Ship.
That's right.
That is where we first see and don't notice, I think. Oh, no, it comes up.
Yeah,
because Brightbill says, "Mama, what is that thing?" And Roz's computer brain found the right word. That's a ship, which is, I think, how Brightbill then has the vocabulary when they go to the city to call everything ships.
Oh, yeah. Call it flying ships and rolling ships and
ships on the ground, ships in the water. It's pretty charming.
That illustration also supports my idea because it's clearly from the island that you see that ship in the picture.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's how, if anybody is curious, that is also the sort of point of view of, in my opinion, Toni Morrison's Beloved. I think we can only hear the point of view of any character who is in the house 124 Bluestone Road. And so if you ever wonder when you're reading that novel, why do you never hear the point of view of, I can't remember his name, Setha's husband, or these other characters? If they're never there at the house, you never can hear their perspective because you can only hear from people who come to that house. So anyway, I love that sort of shit. So another thing I wanted to talk about is the concept of found families. I'm a
classic
sucker.
of genre fiction.
I'm a sucker for it. I love family stuff. And I think the concept of family is so powerful and it's so beautiful. But then a lot of, I think, stories that depict traditional families, I think some of those depictions can do harmful things, right? I think there's a lot of space there for problems that, I mean, we can talk about more if y'all want to, but I love the stories about found families, because, well, I'll just, like, some of my favorite stories are found families, like, Guardians of the Galaxy, which I know is a Marvel property, but I do love it.
Don't go see it, but...
Yeah, I don't watch it. But it's a found family story. My Roommate is a Cat, which I'm pretty sure is not Struck, and you can watch as an anime. It's a story of a found family. Avatar: The Last Airbender, I think you can probably watch. Maybe not.
Iffy. Yeah, I'm not sure.
The Mandalorian you probably shouldn't watch, but it's another one. In these stories, families consciously choose each other and continue choosing each other. And that's something I love about the Wild Robot. Roz chooses to raise Brightbill, and he chooses to be her son, even after joining the geese and doing geese stuff. And even after she tells him the truth of how she killed basically those geese and those eggs. And it's actually not even drama, right? In the book. It's like, here's the thing that happened, and now I'm your robot mom. And
there's a lot more drama about Roz's button turning Roz off or on again. There's a lot more drama about that than there is about the sort of original biological family.
And I feel like stories like this are just so important for children to read. I'm sorry. Because, like, families are complicated. And, I know I grew up, like, like, I mean, it's so trite now to grow up with divorced parents, but like I grew up with but you all read all these books and it's like, oh, everybody has a mom and a dad and they live at home and, you know, like all this sort of traditional things. And it's not the life. I wouldn't even say it's the normal thing for anybody anymore. You know, like families are complicated, you know, and sometimes you just have a robot mom and sometimes you have a cat. And it's like, I mean, and like, you know, families are complicated, and I love a book that like offers the space for that kind of complicated family dynamic for children to be able to read that, you know. And I feel like there's something that's really hopeful and powerful for children to be like, you know, this goose has a robot mom. Like,
there's a single immigrant mother with an adoptive son. Yeah, and it goes great.
There's a moment in which Brightbill has been a little jerk, and Roz goes to the old goose that lives out in the lake in the pond and is like, hey, I'm having trouble. And loud something, that goose is like, well, you know how they are at this age. And Roz says, no, please, no, I don't. Please tell me how they are at this age.
Please tell me how they are at that age.
Please tell me. And then later passes that on when, oh gosh, I don't remember what
the mama
species.
Bear?
Yes, it's the mama
that's
bear.
right.
And Roz goes, well, you know how they are at that age. And it makes me think of the whole acting idea, right? But also the very learned behavior of parenting. It's not, speaking of things you must practice and observe, right?
Yeah.
So
something that shows up a lot in children's literature that I think is deployed really effectively here is refrain and repetition. A lot of, especially younger, so this is for like middle schoolers, I guess, or older elementary school students. But like especially for like young kids, books often have repetition in them. So like, you know, the "Are you my mother?" would be a classic example of like is it a baby bird goes around saying, "Are you my mother? Are you my mother? Are you my mother?" And because children's books are often read aloud with a child, that kind of provides a hook for the child to be participatory in the process, where like when they recognize the line, they can say it with the parent and sort of be involved in the process that way. And this is for older audience.
I would say not to be confused with the horrifically scary Doctor Who episode in which there are a bunch of children going around asking, "Are you my mummy?"
Mm-hmm.
And they are in fact wearing gas masks in a very tragic situation. Different question.
Children are terrifying, and Doctor Who is
Yes.
well aware of it.
Yes. And that shows up, this idea of like repetition and refrain shows up in a lot of non-child focused literature. But a lot of it that happens here is weirdly ironic. We've talked about some of it already. When it talks about at first Roz and then later off some animals, it says she felt something like annoyance, or she felt something like laughter, or amusement, or she felt something like X. And it's because like the book is coyly being like, well, we all know robots don't have emotions, but she's feeling something, and it's something a lot like happiness. And you know what's a lot like happiness? The book doesn't say this explicitly, but happiness is a lot like happiness. And likewise, you get that line that we talked about. Clearly, so-and-so was not designed to do X, or so-and-so was designed to fly. And it's like, that clearly there is very insistent, and is ironically insistent, because they're not designed. None of these things, all of these entities are good at this thing and could, you know, like, are capable of these things, but like no one designed any of these creatures to do any of these tasks, except possibly Roz was maybe designed to care for plants. That's possible. But like many times when you see a phrase repeated over and over in this book, you're supposed to question that phrase. The "as you might know," or "you might already know this" lines always precedes something that's kind of questioned. As you might know, robots don't feel emotion. Or you might already know this, but robots don't have families. That I don't know if that's a specific example, but that's the sort of way it's deployed. And like that's a cool like writing trick that happens in the book. But there's one bit of repetition that I spotted, and I noted the first time this line appears because it's a really powerful line, and then it happens again later. And it's always with regard to fire, and it's animals will move forward, eager to feel more warmth, and then move back, afraid of feeling too much. And that appears twice, once in the initial, like, teaching animals how fire is, and then, or maybe it's in the winter? Anyway, I mean, it's once inside and then once at the bonfire. And that I don't think is ironic. I think, but it is kind of talking about something other than what it's literally talking about, because there's that wonderful essay about in order to experience the joy of being loved, we must submit to the mortifying ordeal of being known, and like to be vulnerable and be part of a community both has warmth but also has the risk of being hurt and feeling too much. And like, by being friends with Roz, when the evil robots show up and try and capture Roz, the animals have exposed themselves to that risk, like either the literal risk of like being killed by a robot or the sort of emotional risk of having their friend leave. And I love the words that are repeated, the phrases that get repeated in this book are very evocative and really stuck in me. So I was able to immediately go like, oh, they're saying that line again. That's interesting.
And the whole, I think Roz is meant to grow gardens thing, exchange, it ends with, perhaps I am simply meant to help others, which is presumably a reference to Roz's actual human intended design, right?
Or possibly, like, the purpose of all sapient beings.
Sure. But I mean, I think it's probably a tongue-in-cheek reference to the fact that there's a robot working in a greenhouse all the time. But, yeah. Good writer.
So, in addition to all the literary discussion and the philosophical discussion about, like, the nature of existence and so on, we're also just big utopian sci-fi fans. So we're going to head to 10 forward, and we're going to talk about geeky stuff. I want to start with robots in sci-fi and what they mean, what robots mean in science fiction. And because we like, I think that the popular imagination, and certainly the way that I thought about like how robots work in sci-fi, is that like people came up with this cool idea for a metal man, and then later someone looked at metal man and was like, there's something to this. Maybe I could use this as a metaphor for oppression or enslavement or labor or something like that. And that's in fact not the case. Robots, from the first idea of robots have been about oppression and exploitation and labor. So there is an illusion that I don't know if y'all noticed. So Roz's full name is Rozum, which is a direct reference to the first work ever about robots, the work to coin the word robot, Rossum's Universal Robots, which is a play.
Cool.
And in the play,
Whoa.
So RUR is that it's RUR : Rossum's Universal Robots. And in this play, and it's from like it's earlier than you think. It's the early 20th century, I want to say. The robots in the play aren't like mechanical people. They're like genetically engineered people. They've figured out how to make organisms out of a different sort of organic matter, and because they are different, these people, because they are just like straight up humans, indistinguishable from humans if you look at them, they're enslaved. They are forced to work, and then they, in the course of the play, they insist that they are people, that they have emotions, they revolt and rebel, they kill a bunch of humans. There's a tenuous state at the end where, like, the robots are trying to figure out how to build their own society. A robot falls in love with a human. Like, all of the stuff that we think of as like, oh, this is what clever science fiction is thinking about when it thinks about robots, is just like, that's what robots are in the imagination of sci-fi. It reminds me of a great tweet by an account called The Jaded Guy that's imagining this conversation between game designer and writers David Cage and Yoko Taro. David Cage made Detroit Beyond Human, which is a game about robot uprising. Yoko Taro made Nier Automata, as well as a bunch of other games, which is about like androids and machines fighting each other and whether or not, what feelings they have. Notably, Nier Automata is a game where everyone insists that androids don't have feelings, and they do. And that this conversation is David Cage asks this profound question: can a robot learn to be human? And then Yoko Taro says, can a human learn to be human? And Cage is mystified and doesn't understand that this is the interesting question, is that robots let us talk about humans and what it means to be a person. And like that's what The Wild Robot is doing here. It's like clearly referring to, I don't think I mentioned RUR, written by a Czech, I think, playwright named Karel Čapek. And like Wild Robot is just continuing Čapek's project. Like, artificial people tell us what people mean, and like this is doing that, and like it's definitely got this surface reading of, hey, cool, cute robot, right? Children like robots. Robots are cool. Robots are big metal people. But also, like, robots are a way for us to be like, what would it mean to be a person who did not need to eat? What does it mean to be a person who can just stand and wait and watch and learn and be completely motionless and learn the language of the animals? What does it mean to be a person who slave catchers can show up and bring you back to your owner, so-called owner? Mm-hmm. And that's cool. I mean, it's super neat to see kids, this story for literal children that's like, hey, robots are deep. We need to think about robots.
Hey, speaking of historical robots, did you think that there was the implication that Roz, has a positronic brain or relies on Asimov's 3 laws of robots?
Possibly, yeah, because Roz can't commit violence, which isn't specifically the rule, the first law, but it's close.
And she can't, and she has to protect herself. That's, she can't go into the water.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think we get a deployment of, she felt something like fear there. It's like, well, of course she couldn't really feel fear, but she did, had the sense of self-preservation and wanted to keep on living. And it uses the word living there.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah.
I feel like everybody has found Asimov's laws of robotics to be, like, inescapable.
I mean, Asimov, so if you don't know what we're talking about, Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. One is robot can't harm a human or through an action cause them to cause harm, or cause them to come to harm. Second law is a robot must preserve itself except as it conflicts with the first law.
Actually,
no, second law is must follow. Third law is, second law is must follow orders except as it conflicts with not hurting humans. And then 3 is must preserve oneself except as it conflicts with the other 2 laws. And like,
correct.
Those to me feel like rules for not being afraid of robots.
Oh, yeah.
Like
100%.
Those are rules that society makes because robots are scary, because people who you are exploiting are scary.
Oh, but Asimov 100% understood that.
Right. I mean, yeah. That's what Asimov is doing. That's what iRobot is all about. How like, hey, how come y'all don't realize that these robots are people?
Also, The Naked Sun. I feel like that's what that book is about. If anybody wants to read a little Asimov.
So, on a not unrelated note, I really appreciated what felt like a tiny bit of a twist, but not unexpected given the book, of where, we know that Roz is a special robot. despite the fact that Roz has a number, introduced as Rosum Unit 7134, right?
And she's one of 500 on her ship and one of 5 who washed up and the only one who survived.
Exactly. So Roz is a special girl. So despite the fact that she has a number, we see Roz as an individual immediately.
Oh, yeah, she's another special magical girl.
Yeah.
We've had 2 special magical girls so far.
Both of whom learn the language of things things that we think can't communicate with each other.
Drop the mic. I did great.
But what I appreciated is that when we see additional robots, when we meet Recco 1, 2, and 3, they each manage to distinguish themselves. Mm-hmm. We are not meeting exactly 3 off of an assembly line, even though they present a unified front initially. The moment they split up, they become people. And I think the book just does a great job. Like, our expectation for numbered robots is one thing, and this book's like, nope, you still can't have it. You didn't have it with Roz, and you can't have it now.
They say that Roz is defective or something for like not wanting to go back and work, but like we don't ever have the implication that's actually the case. There's nothing fundamentally different about Roz. It's just like she had the opportunity to become part of a community without exploitation.
Exactly.
So I think she's defective because she won't come. I mean, right?
Yeah, I mean she's not behaving as human society wants her to, but like it's not due to some it's not that she got a chip busted. It's not that she had an error in her programming. It's that she's expressing her agency that all of these robots have. Like, all of these robots could say no and probably get destroyed and dismantled and reprogrammed, but she's one who has the opportunity to say that without immediate repercussions.
Just like everybody in the 3 mandatory institutions that we have in our modern society. Foucault argues that schools, prisons, and mental institutions are our 3 mandatory institutions, so it's no different. Like, I mean, I think it's no different, right? She's only defective because they say you're defective because you're not coming with us. This is evidence of a defect. Just like, they used to put women in mental institutions because they were hysterical.
And where hysterical usually meant not fulfilling their social role, like not being willing to be a homemaker, not being willing to have children with their husband, etc., etc.
Well, so everybody else has gone deep, so I'm gonna go shallow. I'm gonna pull a Michelle Obama here, except for the opposite. I'd like to nerd out about shit.
Last episode we got tentacles, now we got poop.
Okay, but like that part about the cheerful pooping, I just super loved it. So what happens in the novel is first Roz gets a home. She needs a lodge for her goose baby to live in to be safe. So the beavers help her build a home, and then they say, hey, you should talk to the deer and they can help you with the gardening. And so the deer comes and she looks around. She's like, yes, it's gonna be a nice garden. And she helps Roz get it started. And she said, now what we're gonna need everybody to do is come here and poop. And so there's like 2 pages. Here it is, Tawny. Tawny's the deer, and she's like, it's page 93. Please leave your droppings around the nest. The more droppings, the richer the soil, the healthier the garden. As you can imagine, Tawny's request got everyone's attention. Everybody loves this. They all want to come and poop. And it's so cheerful.
We're happy to help, said 2 smiling weasels after finishing up their business. It was our pleasure, said a flock of smiling sparrows before they flew away. I shouldn't be much longer now, said a smiling turtle as he slowly made his contribution.
After some pleasant conversation, each neighbor would choose their spot, leave their droppings, and be on their way, and always with a smile.
And skimming back to that first paragraph, the place was soon crawling with woodland creatures curious to hear more about the garden project, and just like that, the robot was meeting her neighbors. The plan to help her make friends was already starting to work.
Yeah.
Like,
and
amazing.
It was pooping centric. This, I think, although I actually laughed out loud in reading this part. I thought it was hysterical. Like, I guess I just read too much children's literature because children really do love this poop stuff. Like, they're super in for it. So I know any child reading this part is going to love it. But I think it accomplishes a couple of really interesting things. I mean, one, I definitely think this book has a lot to say about sort of natural cycles, you know? Like, this is about, like, making a garden and cultivation. And, I mean, I think there's something that's really, that's kind of cool about that. And to point out that pooping's a part of that cycle of natural stuff. And then I also think we in the United States, we're a little bit
Poop phobic?
well, yeah, we're a little bit weird about bodies and bodily functions and pooping, and it's this whole big private thing. So to have it here in this book, be just like, hey, how are you? Hey. I am here to poop, to help you out. You're welcome. Have a great day. I just think there's something marvelous about it because it's so, like, counter to our culture. And probably this is probably healthier. I mean, for the people in the community, you know, to not be like, oh, let me find a place, you know, to hide and poop. So I don't know. I just thought, I thought it was delightful. And two, I think it's doing some shit.
Well, there are two other examples of pooping that I can think of in the book that you're nodding, Lissa. Are you thinking the ones that I'm thinking of?
I was thinking of the way it's weaponized later.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
When
and earlier.
Recos and earlier. Recco, whichever the attacking robots are.
So initially as Roz is like just kind of flailing around the island, getting attacked by animals and like tripping over shit, she like I think tries to greet some birds and they answer by just pooping in her face, like birds do, and then she makes friends through pooping, and then later comes the Rico confrontation that you're talking about. Yep,
in which it is thinking about like the earlier bit we talked about, like productive violence, right? Productive struggle, leveraging the same tools that allow the garden to grow and flourish, to defend against attackers.
What do they do to the robot? It's
I
real
think they
rough.
blind the robot. The robot can't see because of the bird droppings.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a robot that goes into the woods, gets stuck in mud, turns around and starts going back. And in that process gets pooped on, can't see, comes out and runs into a bull moose that wrecks them.
Yeah.
And breaks them up into parts. A surprisingly violent end. Like, the violence is not gory, but it is, like, it's dismemberment, right? These things are ripped limb from limb.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe the one thing that this book thinks is genuinely different about robots is that you can take them apart and put them back together again. Like, robots have interchangeable parts in a way that animals do not.
Except for the lizard that dropped its tail.
I take it back.
Roz actually
to escape
gets a wooden prosthetic foot too. I mean, like that. I mean, people have prosthetics.
Yeah, I stand corrected. I'd forgotten about the lizard story. Something that is real quick that we haven't mentioned is that this thing has a whole lot of chapters. It's got 80 chapters. Some of the chapters are one paragraph long. Many of them are 1 page long. And just about every chapter title is a noun, which kind of fits into my my object-oriented ontology thing of like, the chapters are things like the gosling or the first flight. And very rarely they'll be like, the gosling grows. There'll be actions taken by nouns. And the last rifle. It's all of these chapters are about objects, things in the world of the things in the world of the fiction, and there's not like flowery language there. It's not like the key to flying is blah 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 blah. It's the gosling flies.
I really did like the way the chapters were not consistent. How there were really short ones and then some longer ones. Like, I like an organic chapter.
I liked when the geese got a gun.
That was so wild.
Some geese got a gun and shot a robot to death.
Was it the vultures or the geese?
I thought it was the geese, because they were the ones
geese
who
pulled
saw...
the trigger.
The geese were the one who knew how to use a gun, because remember their goose leader had gotten shot when they were away with the humans. In fact, I believe the only things humans do in this book is shoot a goose and try to steal back Roz.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of like using earlier skills later. The geese learn how to shoot guns from humans. Roz uses camouflage in the final battle against the robots that she used very, very early on to learn animal language. These are straight up laser guns, by the way. These are like...
Yeah.
They were clearly
melting
in
metal.
the sci-fi future. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's a sci-fi novel. I mean, I think in a way kind of ironically, because the book is sort of Hatchet in many ways, but it is set in a future world.
Woo. I'm nervous about this one, y'all. All right. So at the end of each episode, we pick the next thing we're watching based on, or reading, or whatever, based on a connection from this book. This episode had information transfer as sort of a crucial component to the community and survival. So next time, we are reading a book called The Collapsium by Will McCarthy.
Huh. I don't think I know this. What's it about?
I know nothing.
It is it's from the year 2000. It's a science fiction novel about a telecommunication ring that is made of something called collapsium, which are mini black holes. Mini as in like micro black holes. And this telecommunication ring is attacked and pushed into the sun. And so people have to collaborate to figure out how to save their network of what keeps society up and running. And it sounds interesting. I see some reviews saying, maybe the pacing is a little weird. We'll find out. We will read to find out.
I'm excited.
I'm excited. I love physics science fiction.
It will probably be, more in the hard sci-fi category than what we have read. I mean, it will be, for sure. More classic sort of sci-fi. So, we'll see. It should be available ebook or physical, whichever your preference is.
Awesome. So next time we'll be discussing Collapsium on Before the Future Came. You can find links and show notes at beforethefuture.space. That is a real web address that will really work. You can put in your browser, beforethefuture.space. If you have any questions or comments, we have comments set up there on each episode, where you can also find show notes. We do works cited for stuff that we've mentioned along the way. We'll have both Bogost philosophy and video games and all sorts of other stuff. Hatchet will be on there. If you don't want to comment, you want to contact us individually, you can write us at onscreen@beforethefuture.space. And we're also on co-host as Before the Future Came, I think. cohost.org/beforethefuturecame. And there's an ask feature on co-host, so if you have questions for us, you can send us an ask on co-host. You don't even have to be logged in, and we'll answer it there.
We're also on TikTok.
Oh yeah, we've got a TikTok, we've got...
and an Instagram.
We're on Instagram. Don't ask me what it is on Instagram. I'm logged out of everything.
But yeah, search for Before the Future Came on those platforms. We are not on Twitter. We are only individually on Twitter.
So I'm Melissa Avery Weir, and I blog at urson.net, and I'm on Mastodon as Melissa at urson.life.
I'm Lucy Arnold and sometimes blog at intertextualities.com.
And I'm Gregory Avery Weir, and you can find me at ludusnovus.net, or you can read my stuff on Cohost at cohost.org/GAW. Our music is Let's Pretend by Josh Woodward, used under a Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. Thanks for listening.
Sure we'll all live happily ever after, surrounded by butterflies, children, and laughter. It's a fairy tale story, so let's just pretend. Hallelujah, amen, it's the end. Happily ever after the end.
You know what? I'm going to start comparing everything I read to that one where she makes that headlamp and loves that bad boy. That's how we're going to even this
okay,
up.
I'll take it back. That's way more embarrassing.
I'm going to compare everything I read to that book series.
I haven't recommended a bad book to either of y'all ever, so.
Oh.